Jason and Jill Crawford were in a somber mood as the three of them rode silently in his fast-moving car on the way to DFW Airport. Jason's thoughts were, "I tried everything in my power to rekindle my wife's love, but nothing worked. I have a bad feeling about this day." Jill's thoughts were, "Wow, Jason's trips to the branch to solve problems gave me a lot of time to spend with my lover. Yay." Later, the parents said goodbye to their youngest child at the airport. The daughter formally put her arms around both parents' necks and hurried to the line 2 hours before her flight. She received a National Merit Scholarship and attended a denominational college in the East. Standing next to her in line, Jason said to his daughter, "Penny, you have a spare Visa card for emergencies, and the rest of your finances should be in order. Do you think you can cope in this strange country?" "Yes, Mom and Dad, it shouldn't be a problem," the daughter replied as she slowly moved through the line, barely hiding the fact that she was bored and ready to finish saying goodbye. Eventually, the daughter disappeared from sight, and the couple silently walked towards the central parking lot. Jason thought, "How can Jill and I live together now, bumping into each other every day like strangers in our four-room house, or will we actually stick to each other? I've long suspected that she was cheating on me with a teacher on the piano, and if this is so, then perhaps she will gather her courage and end our 22-year-long farce of a loveless marriage." Jill, returning home later, said, "Jason, our youngest leaving home is a milestone in our lives and in our relationship. We both know we haven't been happy together in a long time. I know we've both been trying, especially you, to get back what we had, but this cannot happen. I want a divorce." Her husband was not surprised, since he had long felt that Jill was unhappy, and a year ago he had mentally prepared for this moment. Jason Crawford, in his second career, was a computer systems specialist responsible for keeping insurance company offices in the region connected using high-speed communications. His nightmare was troubleshooting the proprietary software used by both the agents and the sales and accounting staff at each of the 12 branches. This complex software was developed in India by a company that is now defunct, and the crutch was his worst enemy, but it helped him stay employed. Each branch had at least one trained and experienced computer science graduate. Senior management was reluctant to transfer expensive software to another company, domestic or foreign. For budgetary reasons, the standard argument in board meetings was, "It's like throwing money away," so each branch continued to work, fixing problems themselves or calling Jason Crawford from the main office. Users complained about trying to get the computer to work every day instead of focusing on their tasks. That day in the car, Jason answered his wife, "I know you've been unhappy for 2 years or more, Jill, so now is as good a time as any to get a divorce. How do you propose to do it?" Jill was shocked and relieved how her husband took it. She thought, "This scoundrel doesn't care about anything. I wonder how he would react if I told him about Harrison, my lover. There's no point in telling him, because he'll only say, 'That's your problem, Jill. Not my damn that arrogant bastard, Jason. He's always so confident compared to most men.'" Then she said, "You wanted to downsize, so let's sell the house and divide everything in half. Make equal contributions to our children's education, okay?" Jason responded, "That sounds fair to me. I'm traveling to Fort Worth tomorrow morning, and I want to be in our office there by 8 a.m. Have our attorney prepare our motion, and we'll discuss it when I get back late tomorrow." During the day, she replied cynically, "Yes, dear, I'll take care of it, like I always take care of everything else." Jill was an actuary and hoped to soon become a partner in the international firm that employed her. Both spouses had roughly the same amount of money in their 401k accounts, and their combined annual gross income last year exceeded $200,000. The middle-aged woman with large breasts and a thin waist still looked attractive. Her ego demanded that young men in their 20s and 30s compliment her every day, as they always had, so that she could relax. However, only her 23-year-old jazz piano teacher and lover, Rolly Harrison, was able to seduce her immediately after she began taking lessons from him 2 years ago, The teacher came to Crawford's house once or twice a week for lessons. The next morning, Jason woke up to his alarm clock. He sensed and noticed that Jill was not in bed. The technician got ready and grabbed his overnight bag and walked down the stairs. He heard his wife ask someone on the phone, "Can you come over after your last class today, since Jason has a long day in Fort Worth and will be working late?" There was a pause, and she continued, "Okay, until 4 o'clock. Jason stood at the counter, reviewing a white paper while he made himself a cup of coffee. Jill, who was surprised to find him downstairs so early, said, "I have piano lesson at 4 today." He replied nonchalantly, "Have fun, honey," as he closed the lid of the paper coffee cup and grabbed his bag. "Be careful if you're going to the office," he said cynically, touching his lips and blowing a kiss to his estranged wife as he walked to the garage door. For the first time, Jill felt a shiver run through her entire body. Her internal question was, "Are you ready for a solo life? Does your husband of 22 years care so little that he doesn't even wonder what caused our separation? You are 44 years old, and with age, this is becoming more and more noticeable. And how long will a young nightclub pianist be interested in a woman like you who has no talent for playing the keyboard? And will you be able to compete with his students when he gives many private lessons?" Jason Crawford, who was just moving out of his garage, had a doctorate as he had earned a PhD in modern languages and had taught French speech and literature at a local college for 10 years. However, in the insurance industry, his colleagues were oblivious to his education and experience living in France as a young man. But while working as a tenured professor, he noticed years ago that foreign language learning on university campuses was in decline. The drop in enrollment prompted him to first earn a master's degree and then a doctorate in computer science. Both Jill and Jason worked together to get an education and be good parents to their young children. But somewhere along the way, their relationship turned into a symbiotic marriage. While Jason was driving to Fort Worth that morning, he asked out loud to no one, "Were Jill and I ever in love? Or were we just providing mutual support for each other to succeed in making money? I guess there was passion at one time, but love died and I have no idea when it happened or how it happened." Jason arrived at his insurance company's Fort Worth branch about 10 minutes before 8 a.m. The door was still closed in the early morning, but at exactly 8 a.m. the branch manager, Marvin Banks, who had worked his way up in the company since sales, walked over with a smile and opened it. Banks was a capable salesman and loved to shake hands firmly, taking pride in repeating, "Every day is a day up." According to Jason, Marvin wasn't that great at running the store, but he was a great salesman. The agents loved him, and he seemed to enjoy the company of the salespeople. He said, "Today we are honored guests from the main office. Sometimes I think you guys break computers to get your jobs. Come in, come in. I'll put the coffee on right away." Responding to Banks' joke, Jason said, "Marvin, you know I have to destroy computers every week so I can pay for my kids' college with all this overtime. Have pity, okay?" Marvin laughed and said, "Seriously, I suspect our overtime pay is about equal. Pour yourself a cup, and when it's finished, sit down. I have a conference call at 8 a.m. Banks left the break room. Around this time, the IT manager came into the room, rubbing his eyes. Technician Harry Brown said, "Damn, the coffee smells good." He poured himself a cup and sat down, looking at Jason and asked, "Damn, you haven't been here for over 3 months, so what happened?" Jason smiled and told a couple of jokes, then said, "The chief information officer noticed that there were almost no complaints about your proprietary software running on laptops or desktops. She wants me to find out what you're doing here, fix it, document it, recompile it, and distributed it to every site." Harry Brown exploded. "Tell her that if she allowed every place to hire enough technical staff, no one would have any serious problems." Jason said, "Yeah, I'll make a note of that, knowing that writing to my congresswoman and talking to her will yield almost the same result. But so far, your system works more often than not, on workstations and the server. and you're using the same software that our famous CIO outsourced to India for development, just like everyone else. So what's the difference? At that moment, a strikingly beautiful Asian woman entered the room, smiled at the two men, and nodded in greeting, even to the one she did not recognize. She walked over to the tea and coffee machine and, ignoring the two men, poured herself a cup. She then left the room, sipping hot tea. Harry Brown said, "That's the difference. Just left the room, Jason." In this building, when she walks into a room, all of us men first admire her technical ability and then go into seduction mode. Oh, although she is a temp agency worker on a 90-day contract, she immediately started troubleshooting computer problems. Then Marvin Banks brought her to work for me. I, along with half a dozen other men in this building, have been in love with her since she arrived here. Jason, I know you're an old married man, so keep your pants zipped up the sides. She's too young for you anyway. Harry, let's go to your office and talk. Once they were there, Jason said, "You and Banks are not authorized to hire technical staff." The it guy grinned condescendingly and replied, "I know that. As far as anyone in Dallas knows, she's just doing typing and files. Please don't tell her, okay?" A visiting it manager said, "Damn, Harry, using a paper scribbler as a technician makes no sense at all. If news of what you're doing gets back to your boss, you'll—" Harry stood up, angry, and said, "So be it. We have a problem, and I solved it. Hey," suddenly sitting down again, "I remembered something. You speak French from your previous life, right?" "Yeah, I lived in France and taught French language and literature for many years while I learned how to hack computers. I finished my education and got this real job. So what?" Harry smiled as if he had just solved the national debt problem and said, "Jason, her English is about the same as my French, almost zero. But you could understand her explanation of the problems in the code and her fixes, and you and Annie could document it and recompile it for use in all branches. Then you could persuade the management to pay her a large bonus. I tried to talk to her, but it turned out to be impossible, except using street language. But you and she could defend the defective program." Jason said, "I owe you one. Harry, would you mind introducing me to Miss Annie? Then could you work somewhere else for a while?" After nodding in agreement, the local IT specialist left. 3 minutes later, Harry and Annie entered through the open door of Brown's office. Jason stood up, and she walked like she was on the runway of a fashion show. During the introductions, Jason received his first shock. She walked up to his side of the table uninvited, straight to the head office guru, and extended her hand in greeting. The charming smile did not leave her face. She radiated warmth as she looked Jason straight in the eyes, showing him her dazzling white teeth, and said, "Thank you for talking to me, Mr. Crawford." Jason sat up, gripping the table, and motioned for her to sit across from him, while Harry politely excused himself and left the room. Jason smiled and began speaking in French. "It's nice to meet someone who sees a problem and solves it without waiting for instructions. This office is very lucky to have you hired by a temp agency. How long are you scheduled to work with us?" She replied, almost unaware that she was now speaking the language. "It's a 3-month, open-ended contract, and I've been here for about 2 months now." "How does Harry keep you busy day to day, now that our crypto installations of software for our users at this place are running most of the time?" She laughed and said, "Help support calls mean user training, and in between those rare calls, I'm teaching myself how to code on more than one platform, I think. Multilingual ability is the future. I'm also working on my English because I'm looking for a contract position as a software developer in one of the 4 languages I speak. Now I would be embarrassed to interview because of my English." He asked, "You've obviously looked at the source code provided to us by the departed developer. So what are a few of the main issues?" After a 2-hour technical discussion, Annie used the French version of the idiom. In short, the rapid access development tool was the wrong approach, and they created a crutch. Your company didn't get what it paid for, Mr. Crawford. I corrected the code in 3 places, so at least he works most of the time in the Fort Worth office. Jason asked, Wow, the CIO, we call her Chihuahua, had a bad day when she signed the initial contract with the Indian firm. And maybe I'll have a bad day when I explain to her what a failure she caused indirectly, of course. Annie smiled at the older man and said, I don't envy you. Jason said, Can you go to lunch early and let me treat you? Annie switched to English and said, Thank you very much, sir. If you can help me practice my English. Did I say that correctly? They both laughed loudly, and Jason, also switching to English, said, I think that phrase is from spoken English for foreigners, and you reproduced it perfectly. At this point, they started discussing current events in English for her practice. About an hour later, it was lunchtime, and he asked, Ready for food and drinks? Sitting across from Annie at lunch, Jason said in French, You are an extraordinary person, Annie, so how did you end up here with me? She immediately felt delighted by the man's interest and replied, I received a scholarship to the University of Strasbourg while a high school student in Hanoi. Both my parents were government bureaucrats in Vietnam, and my father was also a career employee of the U.S. government. They provided travel and other expenses. For my education in France, my ultimate goal was to go to the USA or Canada. So, in France, I met an American student from a denominational college in Dallas who came to France for a summer French immersion program. I seduced him, and we got married. How he wanted to take me with him, I was pregnant at the time. Jason said, He must have gotten his way if you're here. Please continue. She continued, Yeah, but I think his conscience started to gnaw at him because here he was waking up every morning next to a sexy woman he couldn't talk to except for the French colloquialisms he learned in his immersion program. He even began to believe that I got pregnant on purpose to catch him, although this was not the case. After we settled in Arlington, I started going on walks, and 2 years later I met one of the men there. My ex found out about it and filed for divorce, but he pays generous alimony and temporary maintenance since I was unemployed and had not yet become a citizen at that time. I was essentially unemployable because of my English, so with my ex's checks and being modest, with my mom's death benefit from the U.S. government, and working through an agency, I'm coping. Oh, let me explain. My father died mysteriously, and my mother moved here because she won the visa lottery. Jason said, Let me guess. Your father was killed by his government because they found out he was working for our government, and our government took your mother out of Vietnam. Annie winced, an almost worried look on her face. Then she smiled widely and completely relaxed for the first time. There was a pause for 2 minutes, and the waitress returned to check on how their lunch was going. She looked at Jason warmly and said, quoting a phrase from conversation English class, See no evil, hear no evil, do no evil. Switching back to French, she continued, You have more insight than the standard technician. I'm impressed. You have no idea how nice it is to befriend a man who understands complexity to its core, both technical and social. Really? Jason suddenly felt an uncomfortable urge to hug this late-20s woman and said, I'm different from most men in that I have a background in both the humanities and engineering, so my perspective is different. But it's late, and I need to take you back. To the office. Where do you live, Annie? I drive 17 miles each way from Arlington every day because my ex got a job there to go to grad school. Jason asked, Would you mind driving into downtown Dallas if I could arrange it with the CIO? It's about the same distance, and you could drive or take the light rail to our office. Annie thought, I haven't had any experience meeting interesting people in North America until now. But here's finally an exception. Jason is old and not very attractive, but he could help my career and become my fascinating companion. He could also become another male influence for my 5-year-old to spend time with me. I know my mom will be delighted with him because she likes determined, goal-oriented men. She smiled widely and said, Say the word, Mr. regional guru, and I will appear in your office next Monday. After Jason brought Annie back to the branch and kept his manners by talking about working with both Harry Brown and Marvin Banks, he headed back to Dallas in the light afternoon traffic. There, he went directly to his office. At 4:00 p.m., Jason was sitting across the table from CIO Chihuahua. The most embarrassing thing for Nancy Parks was that Jason, the man who now worked for her, had taught French 101 in her youth. Parks repeatedly dumped it because she just couldn't agree on a French verb. In those days, the little lady was widely known on campus as a sorority girl. She later changed her major to information systems and became a professional user of common office computer applications. She had a husband whom she never invited to corporate events and was working her way up from accounting clerk to executive level. She was small, spoke like a sailor, and the rumors around the office were that she had risen through the ranks thanks to her legs, wide and wisely spaced, and still beautiful. She strategically avoided taking responsibility for making costly mistakes, at least among the men who mattered around her on the top floor. Jason neither knew nor cared whether it was true or rumor, but he and everyone else was painfully aware that she was the wrong person for the job she was trying to do. Therefore, he and Nancy had an outwardly friendly relationship, although both were internally seething with disappointment in each other, since it was obvious that she would be his boss during his employment. Jason and Nancy discussed the details of his findings in Fort Worth for an hour, and then he said, "The comprehensive solution to our unstable software problem, I argue, Nancy, is to extend this Enyo's contract for another 90 days, but as a contract programmer, not an administrative clerk. The salary increase will motivate her, and since we both speak her native language, she will be able and willing to fix the errors while I document the server and workstation applications. After that, it will become a professional software, a level that we can all be proud of, including your colleagues here on the top floor." Nancy was initially suspicious of Jason's motives, but then asked, "How long have you known this Vietnamese lady, Mr. Crawford?" He looked at his watch and replied, "It's been about 4 hours or so since I met her. Marvin Banks hired her as a clerk, but when she started troubleshooting workstations, he transferred her to Harry Brown, where she has been working for 2 months. Nancy, I'm willing to risk my career on the ability of the two of us to turn proprietary software into a professional-grade application that we can all use without fear of our computers stopping working." The CIO thought, "God, what an exciting idea, and this idiot can do it." She said, "Wait a minute, Mr. Crawford." She brought up the spreadsheet on her screen and stared at it for a few minutes, taking notes, and said, "Okay, Jason, you and—" She paused, looking at Annie's name again, and continued, "Miss and Joe has 90 days to implement. This is the miracle you are talking about. I will ask Marvin Banks to extend and renew her contract for 90 days and turn her over to us." Jason quickly left her office, half afraid that the distracted lady might change her mind. At 4:15 p.m., Jill Crawford sat on the piano bench, mutilating a piece of music she had started learning a few weeks ago. Noted North Texas State University music alumnus and keyboardist Raleigh Harrison winced at her distortion of the music he wrote during his college days. He thought, "This is the price for sex in the real world. It kills my creation." He interrupted her and said, "Remember to use your pinky, honey, when you reach for C sharp." Jill slid off the piano and knelt between his legs. She smiled warmly and said, "I'm not really in the mood for a lesson, Harrison, but I asked Jason for a divorce yesterday, and he agreed, just like that. Isn't that good news?" Harrison's first thought was, "Damn, $5,000 a year for lessons from this bitch has gone. Or should I keep her on the hook while she pays me for mythical lessons? It's no use teaching her to play. Face it, Grammy nominee, you need to find another wealthy student who can find a C major." By then he was feeling the urge, and they both stood up to head to Jill and Jason's guest bedroom. By the time they closed the door behind them, turned on the music on the tape recorder, and undressed, their passion had already reached its peak. The husband entered the house through the garage, not noticing the loud music outside the guest bedroom door. He knocked on the door and shouted, "Can you turn down the damn music?" He then continued on to his home office and opened the branch's software failure report for that day. As the information appeared on the screen, he said out loud to no one, "Oh, damn, the CEO will be mad when he reads this, but the Chihuahua will calm his nerves. She will convince him that a solution is on the way." Jason barely noticed that the music had stopped. He looked out the window, rubbing his face, thinking while he wrote a company email, and saw the piano teacher hurrying across the lawn to his car, shirt unbuttoned, shoes in one hand, music portfolio in the other. The young man got to his sedan parked on the street and sped off. Jason continued to put together an overview of Annie's plan and his upcoming project. Suddenly, Jill burst into the office with curly hair and a dressing gown. She said, "Jason, our lawyer, drew up a standard divorce form and asked you and I to sit down and draw in pencil a description of each asset and debt, as well as a note about how each would be divided, as completely as possible in your descriptions." Jason finally looked at her and said, "I can put aside what I'm doing now and let's work on it if you want." She said, "Great idea. My piano teacher's trio is playing at the International tonight, and I'd like to come support him after we finish." 2 hours later, they settled their conflicts on paper. They practically split their assets and accounts almost equally when Jason said, "You'll soon be a partner and make a lot of money. So, how about you split the net profit from the FMV of our home 75 to 25 in my favor, and let me buy out your share, and I will no longer have any claim on the Runaway Bay Resort property." Jill's first reaction was to ask, "Is this sly guy fast? But wait, my lover and I could sneak away there for many weekends." She said, "Okay," and made changes in pencil to the draft attorney's note. She looked at her husband and said, "Thank you for being a gentleman, dear husband, and understanding these things. I'm going to write both kids' cards explaining what we're doing. Will you sign it with me?" Her husband replied, "Of course, if you don't blame yourself or me. Both are smart children and will understand that we were never an integral part, but only a mixture. But we had some good times too, right?" Jill smiled widely and extended her hand. "That's right." The following Monday, Annie followed the GPS instructions Jason gave her and made it to a garage in downtown Dallas. She pulled out a ticket and the barrier rose. Then she found a parking spot. The moment she stepped onto the air-conditioned walkway to the building that housed the insurance company's offices, she encountered Jason Crawford waiting for her. They both smiled, convinced that something exciting would happen today. What came as a shock to Jason was that he had to fight the urge to hug the stunningly beautiful woman. She knew how to wear clothes that were rarely or never seen here. Then he remembered that she probably bought them in France or had them made by her mother. Moreover, because she very rarely used makeup, her skin glowed almost like a child's skin. Jason handed her a magnetic card for future parking along with $15 for today's ticket. He said, speaking in French, "This card will be valid from tomorrow, so pay the cashier tonight when you leave. Come on, I'll show you our workroom and introduce a few people. We'll start with the HR department to get a magnetic door key, company office." After Annie got settled, Jason walked up to her booth and asked, "Ready to meet some people?" She smiled and replied, "Yes, it's incredible to be here. Thank you for the opportunity." He smiled and said, "This is actually our chance to demonstrate a miracle. The next 3 months will help both your career and mine." He watched her smile warmly. They climbed 4 floors of stairs and arrived at the office of the vice president of sales. Jason asked his secretary, "Is he there, and does he have a minute for me?" The first thing Jason said when he walked in was, "Mr. Graves, you wanted to know why the Fort Worth branch has almost no problems with proprietary software. Meet the reason, Annie, and go." The white-haired man looked up from the report he was reading and stared at his 2 visitors. and then his face broke into a smile. Graves stood up, walked around the table, and shook hands with both guests, saying, "If my salespeople could focus on selling instead of trying to get their computers to work, I could retire 2 years earlier. We're counting on you, Miss Annie." And based on the glowing reviews I've heard from Marvin Banks, and welcome to the team. The last office they visited was that of Chihuahua, Nancy Parks. She didn't get up when they entered, but stared at the beautiful visitor and asked herself the question, how long will it be before Crawford starts sleeping with her? I wonder. Parks put on a fake smile and, moving only her eyes to look at her guest, said, "We look forward to you spreading your Fort Worth wonder throughout the company, Miss Endo." Annie responded in rudimentary English. "Thank you for the chance to prove yourself with the help of Mr. Crawford." Later, Jason and Annie went to lunch, and while eating, he introduced her to several colleagues. The afternoon flew by as both were now working in the small conference room planning their project. Sometimes employees looked in the door with a surprised look because they heard them speaking French. Later, it was already about 18:00, and the day passed unnoticed for both. In fact, neither of them wanted to finish the job as they really enjoyed each other's company. Jason said, "Traffic gets quieter after 6:30 p.m. Annie, let's finish after we've mapped that stage, okay?" The next day, Jill Crawford took the day off from work and visited her lawyer's office first. Bart Masters, their regular lawyer, couldn't see her because of the paperwork, so his young protege, who had gotten his bar a year ago, came to her. Anthony Baker met Jill when he was preparing the Crawford's will. "Hello, Miss Crawford. Your lawyer is interviewing someone and has asked me to review your proposed division of property that will be part of your and your husband's resolution." They sat at a small conference table, and he went over each item while Jill sat next to him and described everything verbally, and Anthony took notes. He put down his pen and turned to Jill, embarrassed but with a big smile on his face. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead as he asked, "Can I take you to dinner tonight? My workday is full." Jill thought, Harrison is performing in Austin, so why not?" she said. "Anthony, for obvious reasons you can't pick me up at home, so why don't I pick you up?" The young lawyer said, "Wow, Santa Claus is back in business. Here's my address and phone number. So how about 7:00 p.m.? Jill asked herself an internal question. I like seducing these strong guys. Am I a slut? I don't think so, but I like the feeling. At 6:45 p.m., Jill pulled up to a luxury high-rise apartment complex. She said into the emptiness of her car, "This building is right in the middle of the North Dallas club scene and will be convenient for Harrison from NSU for many of his students and performances. I'll rent an apartment here after Jason and I vacate the house." After Anthony and Jill had a delicious seafood dinner and returned to his downstairs apartment, they were sitting on his couch when Jill suddenly took off her blouse and unclasped her bra. She said, "Anthony, you could barely concentrate on eating, but you kept your attention on my chest throughout dinner. Merry Christmas. Enjoy." After 10 minutes of kissing all over her upper body, she said, "Bring us a glass of wine and give me 5 minutes to freshen up in your bathroom." When she returned home, Jill noticed a light under Jason's office door and stopped in front of it. For some unknown reason, sweat appeared all over her body, but she knocked and entered immediately. She said, "Hello, Jason." He looked up, but continued to follow what he was reading on the screen. He said nothing, but raised his shoulders in a questioning gesture. She said, "The final document will be ready for our signatures tomorrow afternoon. Anthony said that if we come and sign it any time after 4, it can be submitted the next day. Of course, we both need to reread it to make sure that there are no mistakes." Jason said, "I'll do it tomorrow night. Thanks, Jill, and good night." Jill wanted to start a conversation, but it was obvious he didn't want to talk. She asked, "Have you heard from the children today?" "No, Jill. I'm sure, like me, they're both very busy." She closed the door reluctantly, as being alone and away from others had always been her secret curse, which she tried not to tell anyone about. A month later, Jason and Annie and Go were having dinner when he said, "I'm moving out of our house, found an apartment, now that my ex-wife and I have closed the sale of our house. My things are in storage, so now I'm a free man after 22 years of marriage. Do you want to be my girlfriend, Annie?" Both usually spoke English now for her practice, and she looked for English words that said, "Let's move into your apartment and make passionate love." But she couldn't find them and said it in French. Jason replied, "Why are we wasting time eating?" They both laughed loudly. She said, "Hey, before you can enter my web, you must be fully prepared. So, eat your vegetables." After they arrived at his new apartment, she looked it over and said, "Wow, you'll be living in luxury, Jason. I love your apartment and its location close to our office. I've walked to the Strasbourg campus on nice days and loved it, even though you lived in a small room. Here you could go to work and still live in this huge apartment." Jason said, "Well, I have a hidden reason for paying big money for all this space." She said, "Would you like to pour us a drink while I freshen up?" She grabbed her overnight bag and disappeared into the master bedroom. There was silence in the master bedroom, and Jason carefully rolled onto his side. They turned to each other, smiling widely. Annie said, "That was incredibly good, Jason, and I needed it. Thank you." The man smiled and said jokingly, "Thank you. We tried to please." They both laughed explosively at his old-fashioned joke. Annie's face became serious, and she said, "But the reality is that you and I reacted to the attraction we felt out of mutual admiration. Having said that, I need a father figure for my 5-year-old child, in addition to being consumed by love men and I in relation to him. You also need to burn with mutual love, and confusing admiration for abilities with true love is often the norm. I am sure that you will find love, and I have hope that I will find mine too." Jason said to himself with a shocked expression, "Damn it. This woman is not yet 30, and she understands something as complex as stupidity in the pursuit of thrill." He asked, "What makes you think that I will find?" She put a finger to his lips and silenced him by saying, "That's a topic for another time. Can we change the subject?" He smiled in surrender and said, "Okay, lead the way, leader." She hesitated for a moment, as if she wasn't sure whether to pursue the topic, but finally said, "It's time to tell you my ulterior motives for seducing you, Jason." Crawford looked puzzled and said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" She replied, "I want you to invite me to stay 1 or 2 nights a week, because I hate the 50-minute round trip from Arlington, and Mom loves taking care of Marcus every day." This revelation was a bit of a shock, although they became close friends. He was amazed that the woman wasn't telling or implying a lie, but disappointed that the reason for her request wasn't because he was an attractive man. Jason said, "Of course your words make sense. I now realize that I was crazy about you because of your exceptional abilities, and after some reflection I would remember that my marriage 22 years ago was due to mutual admiration of abilities with my university sweetheart. Admiration is not love, and here I am, after years of loveless marriage, ready to jump into a relationship like this again. Thank you for helping me understand this." There was silence for a moment as both smiled at each other. Annie said, "Let's change the subject. Why do you live in such a big apartment?" Jason relaxed and replied, "At the opening of this house, there was a special offer. A 3-bedroom apartment for the price of a 2-bedroom for the first year, so I took it because of the location. But in my wildest dream, watching the gears turn in your brain every day, I imagined that you, your mother, and your child would someday move here to me. Your rent would be the same as now, and you could use the second parking space." For some reason that she did not yet fully understand, Annie realized that Crawford had become her ideal man. She even felt a new surge of passion for this man. Annie said, "How about the 3 of us having a Vietnamese dinner in our little apartment in Arlington sometime?" Jason raised his tired head and smiled. He said, "Just tell me when, where, and what should I bring?" 2 weeks later, Jason was driving to Arlington. He recalled, "Damn, I love those nights Annie spends with me. How could I ever give her up? Every young man in the shopping area has eyes for her, and I can't blame them. It's only a matter of time until a man comes along who loves her and vice versa." Arriving at Annie's house, he parked in the guest spot. The complex was one of those middle-class, blue-collar, high-rise buildings with 8 apartments and a steel mesh staircase leading up to the second floor. The Ingos lived on the second floor. The door was opened by Annie as soon as he knocked on the door knocker. She said, "Please come in, Jason. Mom and I have been cooking all day, and we hope you enjoy it." She then switched to English and whispered, "Mom doesn't know that we enjoy each other's bodies. Come on, I'll introduce you to Marcus and my mom." Rolly Harrison hauled his 88-key Yamaha P105 electronic keyboard on the elevator into Jill Crawford's second bedroom. He sat down and plugged the MIDI USB cable into his computer system and smiled appreciatively after checking out the piano-like sound coming from his clipped speakers. Rolly noticed how his student with no talent and squeeze were looking at him with a huge smile. He asked, "Would you like to help me unload the remaining sheet music, clothes, and toiletries from my car? After we're done moving in with me, I'll need to take a shower, and maybe we can do that together after all this work." Jill said, "Okay, let's hurry up and unload your damn car. Then I'll go to the manager's office to see if I can get you a permanent parking spot." Later in the shower, Jill stood next to him. She said, "Rolly, I know we're not mutually exclusive, but please agree that you won't bring lovers to my house, okay?" He replied, "You are so good that I don't need another woman." She giggled and replied, "Yeah, I really keep you dry, don't I? But I hope that you will not respond to the advances of one of the young keyboard players who follow you from concert to concert." With that, she dropped to her knees as Harrison said, "Let's move to your bed and make love, because I want to work on new material with my bassist and drummer before the show tonight and have to leave soon." He continued as they dry themselves off, "This hotel is giving us a rehearsal room, so we need to finish, but I'll make it up to you later." When the musician left, she struggled to her feet. Jill looked at her watch and remembered that she had dinner with Anthony that evening. He said, "I'm something of a foodie. Italian food is my specialty. Jill, would you like to walk over to my house and join me for dinner tonight?" she thought. "God, I need high-calorie food." At dinner, Jill said, "Wow, you are an excellent cook. This fish looks like it came from a high-end restaurant. My fervent hope is to have dinner with you more often." Anthony suddenly and unusually confidently said, "Keep doing what you're doing, and I'll be your kitchen slave, not to mention your love slave." She said, "I need to talk to you about this because I'm going through a divorce now, and the new Jill won't lie or have secrets." The man replied jokingly, "It's a good thing you didn't study to be a lawyer, ha. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to make a living." Jill smiled and said, "Seriously, my partner moved in with me this morning. He is a pianist and works in the evenings and was my lover for about 2 years. My ex-husband would have guessed this if he had thought about it. Sometimes my roommate goes to Houston or Austin to play concerts. When he's home and I'm here, he lights up my soul, but I don't mind playing with you in his absence. You already told me that I am the only one for you, but I am telling you now that you are not the only one for me. If you don't want this kind of relationship, now is the time to speak up." Anthony looked hurt and shocked and said, "But Jill, I thought—" She interrupted him and said, "I crave the feeling of you kissing my body and hoped that we would not stop enjoying each other from time to time. But again, if you want an exclusive relationship and want to say goodbye to me, I completely understand that." He raised his shoulders and took a deep breath. "I crave your touch, and I need to think about it. One part of me says, 'God, what a wonderful woman who doesn't lie,' and the other part says, 'I need real, eternal love.'" trying to reach her with all the words he had learned in law school. He said, "Jill, I got the impression from our conversations leading up to your divorce that you were looking for real romance after leaving a loveless marriage." Suddenly, Jill's eyes became misty and red as she stood up. She thought, "Damn, every lawyer I know is pretty smart, and this one is no exception." She said, "I think I better go. Anthony, thanks for a great dinner. If you change your mind about us, I'm just a few steps away." Jill sat down at her computer and connected to her employer's VPN for a pension project for a company client. The problem the actuary was trying to solve was to offer the client a quarterly funding amount so that they could pay current and future retirees their stated and promised pensions. Two problems were that she doubted the firm was profitable enough to fund a retirement account every quarter. Additionally, analysts like Jill have previously concluded that retirees will be defrauded by the current rate without yield and ZERP, which is all but guaranteed for many retirees. This result will happen, of course, unless they get help from taxpayers. Jill felt a sense of darkness in her soul as she had just finished typing the cover letter for the spreadsheet for CIO approval when she was interrupted by a knock on the door. She was momentarily distracted from reality by fantasy as she walked to the door and peered through the peephole to see Anthony standing outside. She opened the door wearing only panties. Anthony looked at her with the sad look of a killed dog, looking lustfully at her huge breasts, and asked, "Can I come in, Jill?" Annie and Go and Jason Crawford stood at the open door of an Arlington apartment. When Annie's mom came out of the kitchen, she amazed Jason by how much she looked like Annie. The smiling mom was slightly taller and showed subtle signs of aging on her face and arms. She dyed her hair a shiny black color so that not a single gray strand was ever visible to others. Jason wondered, "Annie's mom hasn't gotten fatter over the years, but she must be my age or older. How is that possible?" The mother was holding the hand of a child who barely looked Asian and was looking at Jason with a puzzled look. Annie said, "Jason, meet my mom, Helen and Go, and my son, Marcus Thompson." Pointing to Jason, she continued, "Mom and Marcus, this gentleman is my close friend and boss, Jason Crawford, and will be for another 2 months or more. When I'm not home from work, I stay in one of the 2 extra bedrooms in his spacious North Dallas apartment." The former French professor looked at Helen, amazed by the sight of his mistress's mother, but could not say anything while the handshake was taking place. Jason's thoughts were, "Oh my God, I might fall in love with this woman, I think so." Helen said, "Welcome to our home, Jason. Annie told me so much about you that I believed I already knew you." Jason said, "I will make it a goal to get to know you at least as well as you got to know me through Annie." He then knelt down and extended his hand to her grandson. "Hi, Marcus. I hope the 2 of us fall in love. I think your mom is the best." The 5-year-old boy responded in perfect French, "You are the first lover my mother introduced me to, so you must be special. I don't think we'll have any problems loving each other. Native English speaker." The young man shocked Jason, and as he stood up, he thought, 5 years. On the adjacent walls of their tiny living room hung 2 giant original paintings, one of which depicted the back of a young girl with only a veil covering her buttocks as she stood in front of a waterfall. Jason walked up to the painting, stunned by the tingling effect it had on him, and said, "I love this painting oil on canvas, right?" Helen replied, "Yes. I drew Annie drying herself in front of this waterfall. We swam in the waterfall's catchment area, and she was my living subject. I did this when she was about 12 years old." Neither Helen nor Jason realized that they were very close to each other. The lump in Jason's throat wouldn't go away as he kept sneaking glances at Annie's mom. Jason's first thought was, "What's going on here?" He then looked at Annie, who had a serene, "This is just what I thought could happen" look. Annie thought, "These 2 are stuck on each other because their personalities are completely similar, and the only similarity between me and Jason is that we are both techies. Why am I not surprised? It is fantastic. It seems obvious that I am history. For Jason, his romantic interest is now focused on his mom, although he doesn't know it yet. At the same time, my mother was petrified with fear that this man would decide to become my lover and run away from her life. Stop yearning for my body, then this will be confirmation that he is stuck with Mom. Do it, Annie. There was silence for a moment, and Annie continued. Mom is the president of the Mid-City Artists Association. Trying to carry on a conversation while the two 40-year-olds looked at each other, she continued, Marcus spends alternating weekends with his father and is already fluent in French and English at preschool. Finally, Helen swallowed nervously and said, After you've freshened up, go into the kitchen and choose a small portion of each of the 8 dishes to see what you like and what you don't. We will sit at this table and eat. Jason found 5 of the dishes tasty and 2 of the 5 very tasty. Helen gave him the Vietnamese name of each dish and said, This dish doesn't have an English name, but you can order it in a restaurant by the main ingredient. During dinner, the conversation was casual and often included Marcus, whose presence of mind for a 5-year-old continued to amaze Jason. Mr. Crawford had to force himself not to look at Helen and go, and he felt, it's hard for her to take her eyes off me, too. After a very pleasant evening of conversation, dinner, and 2 glasses of wine, the 3 walked Jason to the front door to say goodnight. Jason said through the open front door, I'd like to treat you 3 to dinner next weekend if you tell me what you'd really like to eat. I'll order this since I don't know how to cook. What do you say? Annie replied, Yes, we accept. Just serve what you and I eat for lunch. That's fine. But, Jason, next weekend's visit will be without Marcus. If it's acceptable, Mom could take the light rail to Dallas, and we could pick her up in front of our office. What do you say, Mr. Piso Crawford? Jill suddenly woke up to the sound of a piano, alternating between tinkling and melodious sounds. Raleigh came home and calmed down by playing at a very low volume. However, the sound woke up Jill, who was sleeping restlessly in the MBR. Harrison's thoughts, as he gently fingered the keys, trying to calm himself, were, I can't stand Jill Crawford, my incompetent landlady, especially after meeting my new wife, in her early 20s, with a child, who is out with friends tonight. The woman is beautiful, receives monthly child support, plus her ex pays her mortgage, and has many friends. How can I find myself in the grip of an aging calculator? But wait, Raleigh, that's life, and my problem can be solved. At about the same time, he heard the door open and Jill came up to him and started rubbing his shoulders. Raleigh smiled and said, That's nice. Jill replied, I bet if you went upstairs you'd feel even better. Raleigh smiled as he began to turn off his equipment. He then hugged her and said, What a powerful ad campaign, and took her to MBR. She loved standing on his huge legs as he walked her backwards. Jill's mind went into a loop, enjoying the sensations but suffering from bad feelings about her project at work that still haunted her. She continued to look for suitable, optimistic answers to the client's questions, but did not find them. She had experience in this state before that damn Raleigh eased her mind, but alas, nothing changed at that moment. The world in general, and especially the small world that she had created for herself, suddenly became disgusting to her. And she even had a eureka moment when she thought, I feel worse in my life than in a loveless marriage. Where did I go wrong? I thought that someone with an ick as high as mine would never be faced with a moral dilemma like mine. Friday was an unusually warm day with lazy clouds drifting over western Dallas. Jason and Annie left work early and went downstairs to relax with an ice-cold drink in the shade of the trees until it was time to pick up Annie's mom, Helen. They were discussing work about a user group testing changes made to proprietary software on a test server and workstations. Annie said, Only 6 code changes have been required or requested in the past week, so we're getting close to completion. Jason. The middle-aged liberal artsy turned techie smiled and said, I've been so busy with other things that I've fallen behind on the paperwork, but I'll catch up with you. She said, I'm telling you this because I have 2 interviews for local jobs next week. I also had a telephone conversation with a firm in Houston. I will not terminate my contract until we complete our project. You know, maybe Chihuahua will throw me a bone. Do you think there's a chance of that? Jason replied, well, the test team leader gets along well with the CIO, and these ladies spend a lot of evenings having fun with the men on the top floor. I know the test team leader wrote to me in admiration when she inserted a JPG into the form and was surprised that it worked. An error-free application form appeared immediately after we uploaded our new revision to the test server. Chihuahua is also impressed that test users are very supportive of the changes to the software and the work we've done. So, Annie, with her influence, maybe Miss Parks will throw you a bone. She smiled back. I couldn't do this without you, Jason. Not only the software part, but I also feel almost confident in interviews now. You trained me day and night, and my English level has improved significantly. Pick any verb, Jason, and listen to how I conjugate it. The man tested her on too, which she completed with ease, and both smiled widely. How can I thank you, Mr. Crawford? Jason smiled and said, you thank me every time you set my soul on fire, and because you introduced me. Jason didn't finish his sentence when he saw Annie put her fingers to her lips in a SHH gesture. Annie responded, you and I both came out of loveless marriages, and we're both smart enough not to do that again. So, we enjoyed the moments of hugging each other during this time. Jason thought, because she used the past tense, Annie will no longer sleep in my bed. Oh no, will I miss her or not? This woman used 2 Native Americans to get here before she met me, and then used me to prepare for the job market, and I have to admit, she gave me back my youth in return a great deal for me. He involuntarily raised his margarita glass in tribute to her, smiling quietly into her eyes, and continued his thoughts. I hope she finds someone on her level to love and be loved. Her mom and her dad before must have been unique people who taught her the work ethic and survival skills from which her mountainous self-confidence, not to mention her abilities, stems, and they passed on a good set of genes to her. She became who she is by achieving her goal, even growing up in a collectivist environment. He looked at his watch and said, Annie, thank you for being in my life these weeks, but it's time for us to pick up the car and meet your mother at the station. Later, her mother approached them on the platform with a big smile. Jason then noticed that Helen was wearing a dress identical to the one Annie was wearing today. Autumn colors, worn by women on a cool day, perfectly emphasized their figures. A smiling Jason concluded, Annie's mom designed and sewed these 2 dresses herself. Clearly, this middle-aged woman's artistic ability is her forte. As the older lady came closer, Jason's throat formed again, and he clenched his pants tightly to keep from grabbing Helen and kissing her hello. He noticed that she was holding a small bag and purse with her knuckles white with exertion. As she approached, Jason kissed her lightly on the cheek and said, Welcome, Helen. With noticeable difficulty speaking, she replied in perfect British English, Thank you, Jason, and thank you for the invitation. Marcus threw a tantrum because he wanted to go with me and not get into the car with his father, but I promised him that next time he would be invited. Did I speak inappropriately? Jason relaxed and said, Not at all. Of course, Marcus or both of you can visit me at any time. But as a man, I believe that divorced parents love their children left with their ex, and the child should be well aware of this. She replied, I agree, and this was exactly my argument to convince him to go with Dad without hysterics. Regarding the invitation, Annie told me that you don't mince words, so I'm guessing you actually invited me. He held her free hand, looking straight into her eyes, and said, Yes, I never waste words. Changing the subject, he continued, Okay, ladies, who's in favor of going home and enjoying a glass of wine before dinner from the catering service arrives? Since you didn't order, we'll have the BBQ meats, sauce, and vegetables separately in case anyone doesn't like the sauce. Once the trio arrived at Jason's apartment, they playfully drank wine, ate dinner, and chatted. Annie said, I'll say goodnight and go to my workroom. I need to make changes to my resume and search Monster again for the perfect job. Jason said, Good night, Annie. I hope you and your mom will be comfortable in the full-size bed there. She kissed him on the cheek and said, I have no doubt that we will all have happy dreams. Left alone, Jason asked Helen, Will you tell me about your late husband? She said, Yes. We tried to conceive a child for over a year and finally succeeded. Tan loved our child so much that he spent every free moment with her. My husband and I spoke French fluently and taught her from an early age. Basically, he was an example to her, and she adored him growing up. Annie passed her exams to enter the University of Strasbourg and said goodbye to her father and me with tears. She received a full scholarship, but we sent her a little extra money every month. Jason asked, Tell me about her father's death. She replied, No, it's better to leave this in the past. I can say that it was death from arsenic oxide, and within a week the French embassy paid my expenses for a flight to Strasbourg, at the expense of the American embassy, so that I could join Annie. And I never returned to my homeland. Jason squeezed her hand and said, Say no more, Helen. I can figure out the rest myself. Just glad you're here with me now. She smiled warmly and said, Oh, thank you. Jason, you should know that I most often feel relaxed and self-sufficient. Especially in your presence, I receive my late husband's modest pension for an early death in service from your government and get lost in art, and sometimes someone buys my work, so I'm making ends meet. In this sense, I am different from Annie. She is ready to do anything for success, and I just want to live and enjoy art. I also love taking care of my grandson. He means the world to me, and the Asian part of his appearance reminds me a lot of my late husband. I am confident that Marcus will be as great a person as his grandfather, and Joe was if he wants to. After 15 minutes of talking about local politics, he said, It's late, Helen, so let me say goodnight, and we'll continue this in the morning, okay? The bedroom you share with Annie doubles as her workroom and has an attached room. Bath. I'm looking forward to the three of us or two of us arriving tomorrow morning. For example, I had never been to Dallas' most famous landmark, the School Book Depository, a building that is now a museum. Do you want to go? She exclaimed like a child, just as Annie would express joy. I've wanted to do this since elementary school. Let's do it, please. The next morning, the trio took a walking tour of the settlement's first log cabin and then to the Texas School Book Depository building. Afterwards, Helen said, At school, we were taught to rejoice in tragedy, but at home, we mourned it every year. The trio sat under the same shady tree finishing lunch, where Annie and Jason were waiting for Helen on Friday. Then Annie's cell phone rang. Annie looked at the caller and asked her companions to excuse her, and then, putting on speakerphone, answered in English. Yes, Richard. They all heard, I want to go fishing with friends and spend the night on a lake east of Dallas. Marcus won't be welcome here, so can I bring him home early? She put the phone on hold and looked at Jason, who just shook his head and smiled. Fine with me. She then said, Just drop him and his car seat off at an apartment building near downtown Dallas at this address on the road to the lake. Pack him a change of clothes and pajamas. Later, when they returned to Jason's apartment, there was a knock on the door. Marcus rushed forward and walked right up to the man who he assumed was his mom's new boyfriend. Jason, who was sitting at his computer, stood up, picked it up and said, Hey, Marcus, I am so glad to see you. The guy suddenly stopped all movements and looked straight at the man holding him. He said, You're glad to see me, aren't you, Mr. Crawford? Jason was shocked by the level of his speech, smiled widely, laid the child down and said, Yes, I mean everything I say to you or anyone else. Marcus smiled widely. Jill Crawford went to a meeting called by the managing partner of her firm. She immediately felt a sense of anxiety and fear when she entered the spacious office and found two other actuaries whom she knew casually. The elder said, "Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. We must find ways to save as the ZERP zero interest rate and financial bubble have wiped out bond fund returns and hit our retirement plan pipeline. Our life, property, and casualty insurance specialists require no additional staff. So to achieve the savings needed, the firm will offer you, ladies and gentlemen, either a severance package equal to 6 months' salary today, or you can choose to work for up to 6 months while you look for another job. Of course, if you resign, we will pay a prorated portion of your severance pay. I will also provide each of you with a letter of recommendation if you wish, since you have proven your competence as an actuary. The board of directors and I appreciate your service over the years, but what happens in this office is a common occurrence. Grimes from HR has details for each of you, and you can meet with her tomorrow if you're ready to make a choice." She stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Jill went home in a daze and very depressed about her future. She kept remembering her late silver-haired mother's teachings about the wages of sin. She wondered to herself, "Is God punishing me?" She didn't even remember driving when she pulled into her apartment's parking space. She noticed that Rolly Harrison's car was parked in its place, and immediately felt the excitement of a meeting that would put aside the heavy reality that was weighing on her, at least for a short time. She walked into her quiet apartment and then walked over, pressing her ear to Rolly's bedroom door. There were none of the piano sounds she was used to hearing when he composed or taught. But she waited, and then heard a young female voice say, "Oh, Rolly." Jill threw open the bedroom door and squealed. "Damn it, Rolly. The ground rules you agreed upon were that you would not bring your mistresses to my apartment." Rolly pulled on his pants, zipped up, reached for a stack of sheet music on the stand, and said, "Jill, don't be so provincial. Be reasonable." Jill screamed, "Reasonable? You are an unprincipled asshole. My apartment stinks." Jill slammed the bedroom door, walked down the hallway, and crashed into a chair at the dining table. Her introspective thoughts ran wild. "I would like to talk to my mother. Maybe I'll go to hell for this. What have I done to my husband and my marriage, not to mention my children? When and why did I stop loving my husband? Jill, you're crazy and need help, but no one can help. What are you going to do 6 months after you're unemployed?" She suddenly sat up and said to herself, "I know what I will do. I will get Anthony to move in with me, and I will do it so that he will do his best to support me. I need to maintain a small waist and large breasts, and he will happily become my slave. Everything will be fine, Jill." Then another inner voice said, "This puts your problem aside for a moment, and then what? You are about to turn 45 and the wrinkles on your face are becoming pronounced." She slammed her fist on the table. Life was so cruel to her. Over the next 2 weeks, Rolly persuaded Jill to let him stay with her a little longer while he got back on his feet. Jill later said to Anthony, "How would you like to break your lease and move in with me?" He replied, "You mean sleeping on the couch listening to you and this musician play?" "Yes, Anthony, if you did that, it would be a perfect world for me. You could still enjoy my body as much as you want." The young lawyer was shaking with anger when he suddenly stood up to find his clothes and said, "Go to hell," and abruptly left the apartment, slamming the door. Her embarrassment, pain, and shame at that moment were the most intense in her entire life. A month later, during which time Anthony had not returned to Jill's apartment, she was struck by a harsh reality. You will soon be unemployed, and there will be no one to pay your bills. Later, she sat with Rolly while he enjoyed the dinner she had prepared. She said, "My job ends in 5 months. Severance pay started a month ago. For the past month, I've been throwing out my resumes like confetti with 0 responses. I'm worried about my future." Rolly looked at her, chewing a mouthful of steak. The look on his face was, "Why bother me with your problems?" And he said, "Well, Jill, I'm sorry to hear that. I was going to pay you the balance of what I owe on last month's rent on a Sunday, but my week's gig ended after 3 nights, and we often played to an empty club. So this whole thing is hard. The next week, Jill came home to find that Rolly had moved out with a month's rent unpaid while she was working in Houston. His 2 keys lay on the dining room table. There was no farewell note. The Chihuahua walked into Annie and Jason's workroom with a smile. Annie was working on her resume alone. The CIO said, "My team and I want to buy you lunch today. Annie, are you ready?" Annie smiled and said, "Great, thank you." At one point during lunch, the chief information officer stood up and said, "Annie, every site reports no errors when using your modified proprietary software. The board and management thank you, and I thank you. I even managed to negotiate a small check for you from the CEO, and I swear alligators were flying when he approved it." There was laughter around the table. She handed her the check as the ladies and gentlemen laughed and applauded Annie and the chief information officer's joke. After work, Jason flew in from Oklahoma City later that day and parked in his reserved spot. He then noticed Annie's car in its usual numbered spot. He smiled and quickly headed to his apartment. Helen, Annie, and Marcus stood at the door with smiles. The temporary worker said, "Surprise, Jason, I got this nice bonus from Chihuahua today, and thanks to you, I'm treating us to dinner tonight." Later, the wine flowed freely and laughter echoed among the adults, while the youngster focused on playing on his iPad. Jason noticed that Helen had drunk a little too much. Annie, who had also had too much to drink, said, "Jason, I have a secret. Mom wants to spend the night with you in your bed. You do not mind? Hee hee." Jason, being completely sober, replied, "I don't mind, but I'd rather your mom tell me that, wouldn't you?" Annie said, "Of course you're right. Forgive me." Changing the subject, "I've been offered a job, but I don't like the starting salary in this industry, so I'll wait before responding. I should probably get 1 or 2 more offers. My last paycheck from the insurance company will be next Friday, a week from today." That night, Annie and her mom went to sleep in Annie's workroom. Jason lay there for an hour, staring at the blades of the Casablanca fan as they slowly rotated above him. He found himself unable to sleep as he tried to sort out his feelings. Do I love this woman, or do I simply admire her daughter's extraordinary abilities and transfer them to her mother? The next morning, everyone apologized for yesterday's drunkenness, but no one spoke about Annie's careless statement. On Saturday, the 4 played card games again. Jason was amazed at how advanced the 5-year-old was at games of chance and even games that required skill. He thought, "Wow, these people are part of my life now." Everyone went to bed after watching a 40s movie, and once again Jason was staring at the ceiling. He suddenly stood up and went to Annie's room, knocking on the door. Annie opened the door and stepped back, allowing Jason to enter freely. The middle-aged man walked up to the bed where Helen lay and smiled at her as she smiled back. He asked, "Would you like to sleep in my bed, Helen?" Helen smiled as she took his outstretched hand to help her up. The 2 40-year-olds walked into Jason's bedroom holding hands while Annie continued learning how to program in Swift. Annie accepted a job north of Dallas, and Jason helped her and Marcus move from Arlington to an apartment in McKinney, and also helped her mom move into his apartment. Both he and Helen became each other's significant others, and he even added her to his health insurance in time. Helen turned the second bedroom into an art studio, much to Jason's delight. Jill was unable to find work as an actuary, but took a job as a financial analyst at a significantly lower salary when her job ended. She enjoyed the company and love of some young men for a short time, but less and less as the pages of her calendar came off. She often looked at old family photographs. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next